you sort of bequeathed me the messaging topic, which is good. But and I'm a PR guy. I work for nonprofits, and I'm on the board of CCC, Climate Crisis Coalition, one of the organizers here. Remember Ian Scholes in the Mystery Duck's Breath Theater? For those of you who've been listening to NPR long enough, he talked about not making money is Zen capitalism, and not spinning is Zen PR. I didn't get into this business to spin. I got into the business to tell truth to power. You said something about how the truth will set us free. For me, it's more about confrontation with the real case. And I'm going to talk a little bit about to spin or not to spin, and what's the purpose of framing an issue like this. But just one example that you reminded me of when you asked about the malleability of public opinion. I worked with an outfit that was spearheaded by the Danish Office of Technology called Worldwide Views on Climate Change in the run-up to COP15 in Copenhagen, the climate conference. They countered the polling that was showing that opinion on climate change was going south by doing in-depth deliberative studies. They would bring people from all walks of life together into a room in 5 cities in the United States and 87 cities around the world. They would give them the 4th report of the IPCC, a digested version, granted, but a fairly digested version. Give them a day to absorb it, teach about it, have them deliberate among themselves, and then they would ask them the questions. Not at dinner time, not when they were trying to hit them, amid distraction and stoke their fears, and then take a yes or no answer from them. And surprise, surprise, all the polling flipped, 70 to 80%, including in China, including in developing countries, and developed countries alike, all said, not only do we have to do something about this, not only am I willing to spend money on it, but we need more robust measures than anything that's being considered by the U.S. Senate at the time or by the UNFCCC. So that's an example of difficult confrontation with the truth. I mean, I got 4 pages of notes and 2 hours of sleep, and it's Tim's fault because we were talking at dinner last night, and he really confronted me with civil disobedience, willingness to go to jail. What does it really mean to deal with the elite media? What does it really mean to deal with the elite policymakers on this issue? Conventional wisdom says if you're going to do publicity, and some of you will be doing that around this issue, you got to frame things positively instead of negatively, right? But how do you frame planetary death positively? What would it mean to attempt to do that? It seems dishonest. I've heard expert presentations, I'm sure you have too, that are very convincing that say on paper, this is not a solvable issue. You look at the trajectory of where we're going and the solutions that are on the table, and absent a total unpredictable paradigm shift of where we are now, we are not going to avoid catastrophic warming. Yet I'm not pessimistic nor am I optimistic. But just that fact that on paper it doesn't look, even to us, realistic that we're going to get a carbon pricing mechanism out of Congress in the foreseeable future, tells you that the issue needs to be reframed, because there's a very strong subjective lens through which we see this stuff, and even the way we're looking at it, we can't see our way clear to an effective solution in real time. We don't have 2 years. If nothing comes out of this Congress in 2 years, as is likely, that's really going to queer the UN climate treaty process big time. So the issue is, reframing and changing the subjective lens, because the framing that we have right now is not working. And one reference point I have on it comes from the Garrison Institute. Rabbi Weisgau is an advisor to them, and they launched. I'm their PR consultant, and they launched a very interesting project called Climate-Minded Behavior, where they looked at our neurological wiring and what this had to do with climate change. They looked at behavioral sciences and neuroeconomics and stuff I can't get into right now. But there was one presentation which you can get online if you go to andyredkins.earth blog and you look up the one that says Response to Climate Change, Primal Easy, Ethical Hard, or you go to the Garrison Institute website and look at the Climate-Minded Behavior project. You'll see a presentation, a wonderfully compressed presentation on brain architecture by a neuroscientist named Dan Siegel, who talks about how it's kind of a stacked architecture. You got the back brain stuff back here and the midbrain stuff up here, and somebody mouthed amygdala, which the back brain, I'm going to compress it and do a hatchet job on it, make it much worse. But the back sections of the brain which secrete cortisol and flood you with fear and fight and flight and fear response. And this is what we generally appeal to when we raise the issue of climate change, right? Oh my God, the planet's going to die. Now, there's an intermediate part of the brain that filters those responses, takes the wisdom from those responses, because sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you have to flee. But it's the part of the brain that evolved as, we were primates living in social groups, and it includes what's called the affiliative system, where family love comes from, where complex social interaction, being able to read other people's cues comes from, where compassion comes from. And this is the prefrontal cortex. And we have to frame in a way that appeals to the prefrontal cortex. And an example of that is to say, we're in this together. We love the planet, we love our neighborhood. We are related, we acknowledge our relationship to the people in our neighborhood, and we're going to consider that we're not alone. We can make a contribution if we work together. That's a totally different kind of framing. It's no less true than to say, oh my God, we can't solve this problem. On paper, we don't know where we're going. But it's a totally different approach in order to motivate people and build a movement. Now, which is what we're really talking about here. I've spent my career talking to the elite media, and this is, right now, it's not about toadying up to the elite media, or even members of Congress for that matter. It's about building the movement. It's about framing things in a realistic way so that we can tap into the wisdom that people already have, even if they're isolated, even if they're scared, and elicit a different response than the one we're getting now. I was going to say that when you're framing and spinning with the media, it doesn't always work, and I caution you against that. They don't like that. I've been in that situation before, and just this very thing about that I'm describing now, which obviously, I see some heads nodding about, think about, what part of the brain we're appealing to, and that's got some value for activists, right? And that's got some value for trying to understand how this issue works. Even that much, certain journalists will look at that as trying to frame the issue and spin it and say, well, you're just manipulating me. I don't want to know about that. But it is very important to understand, how not just people but ourselves, with what conceptual apparatus we hear this information, and what part of our brains is going to be likely to act constructively on it. Now, I'll give you a couple of other little things to look up. CRED, the Center for Research on Environmental Decisions, which is an outfit in Columbia, did some research applying these sorts of questions and these sorts of ideas, and they found that the more deeply people feel group affiliation and the more strongly they identify with their community, the harder they will work for social goals, the more likely they are to take concerted, effective actions on big issues like climate change. Messaging and narrative are critically important. Overuse of self-protective, affective response, which is probably back here, and the example that they give are the security alerts during 9/11, which occasioned what was called apocalypse fatigue. That leads to numbing, but a balance of rational information, the truth, effective narrative, and an appeal to that part of the brain that can respond with sort of communal, I'm not alone, relatedness response is critical and can empower people to act individually and collectively. And there's a famous case about this. I can't remember the citation, but there was a utility company that offered a green pricing option. You could check a box to pay more for electricity and or to put some money into a fund for renewables and so forth. And they would send you your bill, and you could see other people in your zip code or in your neighborhood who would check the box. So there was some peer pressure involved, a little bit more than peer pressure. There was the sense of aggregation. If I put a solar panel on my roof, I've saved a little bit of carbon. If I effectively show my neighbors that they can do it too, I've saved a lot more carbon. And that's an example of that appeal to the more affiliative function of the brain. So David Gershon, anybody read this book? Road tested these ideas in Social Change 2.0. He writes it up. He's worked at the neighborhood level. He's worked at the city level in Europe, in the United States, and got fabulous results using these kind of approaches and measured the the saved greenhouse gases, and it's very impressive work. I recommend it. Somebody was talking about behavioral change out here before. If we, I think it was Janet. The light bulbs make a difference after all, even though that's it's the most hackneyed thing, and it's a far cry from what we're talking about to create a tax structure that's going to force the economy to consume less carbon. Now, behavioral change is. There was work done at the NRDC and the Garrison Institute that if we did things like that, eat less red meat, keep our tires inflated, things that we can do without a bill, but things that we have to sort of goose ourselves and have a positive outlook and get out of denial and a little bit of self-empowerment and empowerment of our neighbors to be able to do. It's only 1 gig out of the 15 gigs we need. So it's very important to do this. It will only work if we do it at scale. You got to get your neighbors to do it. There are marketing studies, which I don't have time to go into, that say there's 4% of bright greens and they influence the 10% of the medium greens, and pretty soon you can flip the whole structure. So there's hope in that kind of influential, let's do it together sort of model. But the bottom line is what we can do on our own authority is only 1 gigaton out of the 15 gigatons we need to keep warming within 2 degrees centigrade. But and this is the transition to the other point I wanted to make. The important thing is that if more of us do that, we are more likely to demand that our representatives do it too. In other words, if we can get into this head, and you can stimulate this response through an appeal to that more affiliative system of saying, we're not alone, our contributions add up and they matter. And you can get more people thinking and acting that way, they are more likely to demand that their representatives do it too. And so it feeds into the larger policy goals of how you get the other 14 gigs. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about, I have some handouts for you on it, about the thing I know most about, which is the revenue neutral structure of tax shifting. So that if we achieve a carbon tax, we got to give the money back, like many people were saying. And the mechanism that Elaine Kamarck and others have recommended, some people talk about green checks. I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities to cut payroll taxes and use that to make common cause with the tens of millions of people that need jobs in this country. So just a brief primer on how it works, and you'll understand that from a messaging standpoint, what I'm aiming at is, how do you build a big tent? How do you take people out of the fear response about climate change? I don't want to know about it. You're telling me my kids are going to have a terrible life, my grandchildren are not going to make it. To we can work together. We can tackle the problems that we can, see and touch now in our lives. We can make common cause with wide groups of people. We're not isolated. And for me, the opportunity to tackle the jobs issue is very important. I remember going around with CCC and the other organizers of this conference to congressional offices in January of 2009. And we'd make this pitch, why a revenue neutral carbon tax is going to work. I heard a couple of astonishing sort of non-responses from Democrats. One was, we don't need the Republicans. The other was, at a time when, back then we were losing 250,000 jobs, 300,000 jobs a month. So I would make the pitch and say, well, look, if you cut payroll taxes, you use the revenue, the revenue return mechanism, so that it isn't, going into government, it isn't making a bigger bureaucracy that conservatives can object to. But if you're spending all the revenue that's coming in from carbon tax on reducing payroll taxes, you're going to unleash massive job creation. I can tell you a little bit about why that is, but just trust me on it for now. And you've got to do that. You've got to do that to bring Republicans on board. Any climate legislation at this point has to be a jobs program. And I got blank stares. The two bills that came out of this that we really loved and championed were Larson's bill on the Democratic side and Inglis's bill on the Republican side, and they were carbon tax bills with a straight, 95% or 98% tax shift to cutting payroll taxes. So how many people are out of work in this country? Well, BLS unemployment statistics indicate now, I think it's about 14 million. It was 15 million. They cooked the books, long discussion, that according to a somewhat more inclusive measurement, not defining people out, it's 26 million, the so-called U6 measurement. If you look at who's actually employed in this country, and who's not employed, and you throw those definitions out, it's more like 40% of the potential workforce is not employed. And that is 75 million people. And it could actually be more now. I have to update those statistics. So there is an army of women, people of color, youth, seniors who've been forced into, non-income retirement, people with disabilities, legal immigrants, and other chronically unemployed, underemployed constituency groups that desperately need the brakes taken off of job creation. Right now, we charge 16% tax, both on the employer and employee sides on payroll. Now, if you could just just get the concept across, and I'll give you the handouts that give you the details of this. If you suppose you could reverse that, you take the revenue from carbon tax, and so now the energy inputs to business, the create carbon, are 16% more expensive, and the labor inputs, the human inputs to business, are 16% less expensive. You've created a 32% relative price shift, a huge price signal that would touch off an increase in labor demand like we've never seen before. I can talk more about that and the historical evidence for it, but there's lots of it. Now, in terms of building a movement, these organizers had a conference in New York a couple of years ago with We Act, which is the West Harlem environmental action group that, so we were trying to convene environmental justice groups, the EJ community, around this issue. And we had 500 people there too. And they were chanting, saying, we want a carbon tax. We don't want cap and trade. This was during the active period of cap and trade. Why? I mean, that's wonkish. It's not easy to frame for the media. Why were they doing it? They were doing it because they saw quite clearly that their energy costs were going to go up, and people in the neighborhoods couldn't afford that, and there was no mechanism to bring them jobs. Think of Van Jones and Green for All, Majora Carter's work. That's all about bringing green jobs to the neighborhood and connecting those two issues: chronic unemployment and climate change. There's a global employment crisis now, and it's connected in many ways to the global climate crisis. Kofi Annan pointed out that the places where unemployment is highest are also the places where suffering from climate change is the worst in developing countries. But the real reason why the two things are connected is because labor and non-labor inputs or production factors, materials, energy, land, are rough substitutes. So if you use more of one, you use less of the other. Our system, our tax code, makes stuff that businesses consume too cheap, and it makes labor too expensive. And it's distorted the relative prices by over 30%. So if you can switch that, business would use less stuff, and they would use more people. Because right now we're starting from a starting point where we've subsidized the consumption of stuff and the production of carbon pollution, and we have taxed the heck out of employment and people's right to work and contribute to the economy and have sustainable livelihoods and good lives. If that equation can shift, there will be all kinds of movement building and messaging opportunities that we don't have now.